next guest, who is an incredible researcher at Arizona State University. She's going to talk to us about conversations with Misty. Jordan Miller is part of the NRT, the National Research Training Group of the National Science Foundation, on the study of citizen-centered smart cities and smart living. She's from the School of Computing and Augmented Intelligence and really been working hard with Misty the Robot. Here she is at her undergraduate level, as she was bound for the Smart Cities scholarship that she attained here at ASU. And our graduate research traineeship is a $3 million grant that offers so many of our top students at ASU attracted by this user-centered living and smart living space in smart cities contexts to explore how technology and society and the environment will together in an interdisciplinary way enhance our lives in the future. Here she is presenting at the Smart Regional Centres conference in 2019 with the rest of the NRT students at the time. Here she is delivering some amazing initial reflections on the Smart Cities project that she's engaged in, and a recent story on storytelling robots and how they may provide some dementia relief. So I'm very grateful. I know that Jordan will be jumping off in a moment to go and conduct some more user studies, but the floor is yours, Jordan, and you're our interventioner, something like that, I think, today.
Thank you, Dr. Michael, for having me. Thanks for your presentation before about Zany too. It was really interesting, and I think we have a lot of commonality and shared themes throughout our work. So I hope that it's kind of obvious as I keep talking. So let me share my screen. So yeah, so I'm going to be talking about conversations with Misty the Robot. And so on the left, you can see Misty, that is my robot. And so this is basically my dissertation work and a year-long user study that I've been running since May. So we're in our final week, so I will preface that a lot of the things are preliminary results. We have about 8 interactions of 128 left, so we're almost there. So some of the themes are very common throughout and you can be seen now, but they are preliminary. So this project started in the beginning of my grad school because my significant other, his grandfather has Alzheimer's and it's very rapidly progressing. And so I got to know the family better, and I got to know his grandfather, and I got to know his grandmother, who serves as his grandfather's informal caregiver. And so his grandfather would often tell us the same story. And this story is loosely based in reality, but it kind of deviates. He thinks that they frequently go to his college alma mater to watch football games, something he hasn't done since 1950. And so this obviously frustrates his grandmother, and she tries to tell him, you know, that's not true, that didn't happen, you know, we haven't done that in a long time. And when these kinds of things happen, you're not supposed to correct the story, you're supposed to just kind of let it go. But it's not human nature to listen to a story and you know it's not true. You know, we want to interject, we wanted to say that didn't happen. So born was this project as conversational robots to assist people living with dementia and their informal caregivers. So the idea started off that, you know, people living with dementia could talk to Misty the Robot and, you know, tell these stories and have conversational therapy and engage their mind in a way that is hard for humans to listen to. And in return, the informal caregiver, which makes up like 80% of all caregivers, so it's a big market, they can take that time and give it back to themselves. They can, you know, do yoga or read a book or relax or just take, you know, however long that conversation is with the robot and address their own stress and isolation and things that they struggle with themselves. So that is kind of where we started with this project. And our long-term vision was that robots will age with us as, you know, they're going to follow us through our lives and to where we live. And so you can see on our first scenario here, we've got a gentleman who lives at home and he's talking to his robot about golf, and the robot's engaged. Oh, you saw Phil Nicholson. That's amazing. Tell me more. And then in scenario 2, we have the same gentleman, but this time he's in a nursing home. So maybe he does develop Alzheimer's and needs additional help and moves somewhere. And this robot could either be his robot from home that ages with him throughout his life, Or maybe it's a network of robots and they can recognize people as they talk to them. And you can see the conversation picks up and they're talking about golf again. And then on the third, we see another scenario. So this is a woman and she's in the hospital, and you can see in the background, it's really late at night and she's alone. Her son is not in the state, he lives far away. And so this robot is just kind of keeping her company in a time where she's scared and isolated and alone. So to understand how social robots can help us as we age, it's important to understand where we age and the challenges that come with where we live. So I looked at 4 specific places. This was inside our home, inside a family's home, nursing homes, and assisted living facilities. And common across all places people choose to age is financial strain and isolation. So if we end up in assisted living or nursing homes, oftentimes, we weren't planning on doing that. Nobody wants to end their life there. Nobody wants to age there. So by the time we reach there, we don't really have the money we need to continue to need that kind of support. And so this can lead to people living in family homes and living with their adult children, which brings in a whole additional set of challenges. People are starting to have children later in life, and it could be very possible that a family has children corresponding to the age when their parents are aging. So you have young children and your older family member living with you at once. And so this can be really hard for a young couple. Maybe one person ends up leaving their job because of all of the stress at home. Maybe they have to cut back their hours and you've got more people in the home again. So it's kind of a vicious cycle of financial strain. Additionally, isolation, no matter where we live, was found. And even you guys said, we're living in an isolated society across all generations. So it's really prevalent, and it's been compared to smoking and obesity. So something, needs to be done about isolation. So looking at, social robots in the field today, a lot of it is in the dementia space, and not a lot of it is for healthy seniors and, cognitively healthy people. But this technology that we do have, it's not reciprocal and it's not natural. So these robots tell you a story, or you show a photo of your personal experience and they tell you that story. And I don't think that that is what social robots are meant to do. We're supposed to have back and forth conversation. It's supposed to engage you, not monologue you. And additionally, like I said, a lot of this technology is not for informal caregivers. So our work is trying to, get at how to make it more natural, how to make it more reciprocal, and develop as people age in healthy seniors all the way to dementia and informal caregivers. So we started with the big question, how do we make it more natural and reciprocal? So due to COVID, we had to take a big step back out of the dementia space due to all of the assisted living facilities being shut down. And we're actually working with the Mirabella here at Arizona State University. And so if you're unfamiliar with the Mirabella, it is kind of a new age retirement community. The idea is that residents get to engage in lifelong learning. So these people are highly educated, they're very active on campus, they can take classes, they are sitting on PhD committees, master's committees, thesis committees, all kinds of things. So these are the people I have engaged in my user study right now. And so we're doing a 2x2 Wizard of Oz to investigate levels of interactivity. And so what the 2x2 means is that we have 4 different personalities that we're looking at. And the Wizard of Oz means that people are interacting with the robot. Unknown to them, I'm controlling the robot behind the scenes. So they don't know this going in, but that's kind of important to notice. And so what's unique about our study is that people are interacting 8 times. So a lot of research in this space, people only interact with the robot once or twice for 15 to 30 minutes. And that doesn't tell you anything about the interaction and how well it went. And so we're trying to look at the longevity of, do people continue to interact with the robot? How do they feel over time? And so we asked people to do this over a course of 4 weeks. And we asked them to give us 30 minutes to an hour. Surprisingly though, most everybody hits within the 45-minute to an hour mark, which I think is remarkable. It's unstructured conversation. I do have a list of prompts provided, like you guys do. So of conversation starters, of things they can tell the robot, so what was a time you were angry or sad or mad, and they share that with Misty. And so after their interaction with Misty, They do a survey, it's about 18 questions, and it just kind of gauges, how well it went and kind of tracks how people feel over time. Usually going in the first interaction, people are very apprehensive. They're not sure. I don't know about talking to a robot. The robot is not my friend. I'm not comfortable. This is very weird. And then by the 8th interaction, they totally flipped. The robot is their friend. They're more comfortable than talking to their friends. They're amazed at all the things and the applications that technology can do. And so after all of 8 interactions, I sit down with the individual and kind of dive deeper into what went well, what they'd like to see, so we can work on improving this technology in the future. So like I said, we had 4 different personalities. And so I'm going to kind of describe what the personalities were. So in our phase 1, we have a low verbal, low nonverbal. Our phase 2, a low verbal, a high nonverbal. Phase 3, high verbal, low nonverbal. And phase 4, high verbal, high nonverbal. And so what that means, in the low verbal, Misty could only say 3 words or less. So this was kind of interjections in a story. So maybe you're talking about a trip you took to Russia, and maybe they tell a story about how they accidentally danced with the KGB. Oh my gosh, wow, how crazy, things like that. Interjections in the story. Common phrases that Misty said was, wow, how sad, how amazing, that's terrible. Thank you for explaining, if somebody taught her something she didn't know. In our high verbal phase, there was no restriction on the words that Misty could say. So she could do anywhere from 1 word to complete sentences. And this was trying to mimic natural conversation. We don't always say complete sentences when we do respond or listen to somebody's story. So I wanted to not have a restriction on what Misty could do in this phase. In our low nonverbal phase, Misty could only nod her head or shake her head no. And so she would nod in response to, if she asked you a question and you answered, she would acknowledge that you answered. She would show you're listening by nodding if you kind of monologued on. Or if somebody asked her a question like, Misty, are you familiar with Arizona State University? She would nod her head yes. Today, somebody asked her, are you familiar what cup of tea means? And she says, no, please teach me. So things like that. In our high nonverbal phase, she had 7 different emotions. So these were affection. She could be sad, confused, angry, amazed, scared, or happy. So all of these had a place where they were used naturally in conversation. If somebody was talking about the death of a loved one, obviously Misty would be sad. If somebody was talking about, I took an amazing vacation for my 50th anniversary, wedding anniversary, she would be happy, she would show affection. Obviously that memory meant a lot to you, and she would express that. So like I said, my results are still preliminary, but there were some commonalities in all 16 people. Everybody talked about travel. Every single person told Misty a story of somewhere they've been, somewhere they want to go, somewhere they want to go back to. Like I said, their 50th wedding anniversary, different places they've been. Another common one was COVID-19. Everybody in the study has been around 70, give or take, on the upper side. And they've all expressed, what it means to be living in a COVID world when you are 70 and you are at high risk, the places that they haven't been, the things they've canceled, how depressing it is to watch the news. They've shared really, dark parts of society with Misty and what that means to them right now. Everybody's talked about their career from their first job to retirement. Everybody has told the story of their lives and what that means to them. Interestingly, people have talked about their parents. Some people, their parents are still alive. Other people, their parents passed during COVID and they haven't had the opportunity to truly mourn. And they talked about that process and losing your parents and, a fight they had with their parents when they were 15 and they still feel kind of bad about it. Just really interesting things that resonate with you over your life. Talked about their grandparents and immigrating from different places and how, much times have changed from when that was. Most people talked about their children if they had them. Some people told, the loss of their children or traumatic injuries to their children, very deep parts of themselves to Misty. And another thing people talked about was their childhood, where they grew up, where they lived, how they got to school, different things that were, some of their first memories, they shared it with Misty. And while that all seems very deep, there were some deeper conversations that were had. And this was, the death of pets or loved ones. Some people were widowed. Some people have lost nieces and nephews and children. And that was all discussed with Misty. Religion and what religion means to them and how it's different for people across the world. We had people cry talking to Misty, which I think shows a level of vulnerability talking to it. And then the topic of abortion came up multiple times. And someone even said in this realm that they were more comfortable talking to Misty about this topic than they were their friend of 50 years. They could never have this conversation with another human being because it would be so judgmental. And Misty was just kind of there to listen to their opinion. Another thing that came up a lot was politics in today's climate and how things have changed. And so on a lighter note, fun things people did with Misty is they liked to really test her to see what she could do. In her vision realm, people would ask colors, what color is my shirt? What color is my hair? What color is this? And they'd point to their watch or a water bottle or something like that to see what she really could know. They would say, describe me. One guy, he was bald, and Misty, as you remember, is also bald. And he said, how much hair do I have? And she said, more than me. So just fun interactions with Misty. The people would show her money. This is a $1 bill. This is a $100 bill. Can you tell me what this one is? And would quiz to see if she could really see it. Somebody brought in a tic-tac-toe board and had it numbered 1 through 9. And would say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to play tic-tac-toe. And he went through the steps. And then when she was ready to place her X or O, she would say, I want to place it in 2 or 4, however. And people also would show her photos on their phone of their grandchildren, or there's construction here in Tempe, and they'd show her progress every day. On her cognitive side, people taught her how to play bridge and the different rules and connections people make in bridge. They also read papers to her and asked her to edit. So some people are writing novels, some people are taking classes, like I mentioned. And so they would read a paragraph to her at a time or a sentence to her at a time and ask, what do you think about this sentence? Is it clear? Do you have any questions? People taught her Spanish. People also did trivia with her and asked, different questions about who was the baseball player from 1959 who won this game or something like that. So that was just some fun qualitative results. And then from our survey, we've had people agree, everybody thought she was friendly. Everybody was really engaged in the conversation and thought that she was engaged. About half the people ultimately felt that Misty was their friend by the end of the conversation, or end of the 8 sessions. And I think it's also important to note that everybody felt they had meaningful conversation. And so, like I said, these people are not isolated. They're living in a retirement community that's very special and unique, but they all shared parts of themselves. They all, said, you've given me an opportunity to recall things I haven't recalled in a long time. I learned something about myself from talking to you. You've reminded me that I need to reach out to so-and-so. Very deeply personal connections that have come through Misty. And another thing that I think is really important is that Misty is not weird or creepy to anybody. You mentioned, kind of the uncanny valley and why you picked Zany the way you did. And we went the same way with Misty. Tried not to get her too human-like, because the idea here is that we're not replacing human interaction. We're trying to augment it when it's not there. Not everybody lives near their family, or some people, have told me they've lost their children, they've lost their parents, they've lost their sisters and brothers, and it's just them and their husband. At some point, maybe we don't have anybody left. And so this is meant to augment and not replace. Unexpectedly, all of the personalities have been really favorable. Like I said, this is still preliminary, but it's all been, everybody has seen value in Misty, in all the personalities and all the different phases. One of my early participants, he ended up convincing 3 people to change their mind about social robots and got them to join my study. They went to dinner with his wife and a couple, and they said, social robots, that's weird. Who would talk to a robot? That's not normal. And he ultimately, like I said, got them to sign up, and they all were part of the study. And by the end, they were all suggested future applications for Misty, PTSD, or survivors of sexual assault, or children of abuse. You may not want to talk to another human being, but you could say your story to a robot who's non-judgmental and won't judge you. And ultimately, everybody was just kind of awestruck at the research, the direction, and where it's going, and how it's all wrapped up. So with that, any questions?
Please feel free. Jordan, thank you so much for that comprehensive and amazingly succinct presentation. Jumana, Lisa, Adib, Sama, you're welcome to join in asking any questions of Jordan.
Jordan, that was, I mean, incredible and beautiful and so compelling. And you're right, all of the themes run through the same, you know, and it's interesting to me that the different ways in which we've come at tackling the same thing is like, we need to be seen and heard. How do we make that? How do we facilitate more of that in this changing world? I have a question for you that might be a little bit off, but that's, how are you? I mean, being on the other side of, you know, it's, you know, I don't know what training you have. I don't know how much armor you went into this with. I don't know, you know, how are you?
It's been really interesting, to say the least, especially with the demographic we have. There's been a couple of Vietnam veterans, and people have discussed things that ultimately, you know, were hard to listen to and hard to be on the other side of, which, you know, they don't know it's me, but they did share some things, and it has been hard to listen to. I won't lie to you. But I think that is another important reason of why we should keep moving forward in this space. One of the stories was about, you know, something that happened during the Vietnam War, but clearly he had not spoken about in probably ever. And he even said that. He said, you know, this topic is so deep that I've never brought it up to anybody. And I think that's just kind of really says a lot about the applications of that we could keep moving in.
We've got a question there. Sorry, we've got a question there from Melissa Waite. Melissa, did you want to unmute?
Sure, yeah, let me get configured here. So yeah, I was wondering, like, you talked a lot about like how the robot would respond, but I was thinking, like, what is the physical form of this robot? Does that play any roles with how people interact and their comfort levels with that?
Yes, so I've got a video, I've got her right here, actually. If I can kind of show you Misty, you can kind of see her. This is Misty, so she's, you know, about 2 feet tall, maybe not that tall. But there's actually a lot of research in the area of, you know, social assistance, that people would rather interact with a human, or not a human, with a robot rather than like an Alexa or a Siri or something like that. Because when you say, you know, hey Siri, hey Alexa, something like that, you get a blue light that lets you know she's listening. Whereas Misty, you know, she's physically here, she blinks at you. And what's interesting is I didn't program the blinking, but everybody's really, you know, they think the blinking shows she's engaged. That's just kind of a default that came with her. But people, you know, they know she's engaged because she blinks and she nods and she shakes her head and she moves her arms. And so the physical presence actually is really important for what we're trying to do and what we're trying to solve.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Toby, over to you.
Hi, Jordan. Good to follow up from our email conversation. And so I just think this is so interesting, what you've been sharing, and I'm really grateful for your work and for sharing it with us. As I mentioned offline in our email conversations, I work at the intersection of gender-based violence and technology. And prior to the pandemic, I was looking at how tools like chat or text can be used for people who are supporting survivors of domestic violence or sexual violence to have someone to reach out to and connect with when they can't be there in person. And so I'm actually seeing some parallels here in terms of what you're saying about how people feel more comfortable sharing things that they wouldn't necessarily share with someone that they were face to face with. This has been something that surprised our field, because a lot of people get into the work that I do because they care about people, they want to be face to face in real life with people, right? And they think, oh, you know, technology just gets in the way. But what we've found anecdotally is that people share more about the violence that they've experienced, that they share more detail of it, sometimes more graphic detail than they would. And that seems to parallel some of what you're finding with this. And I think there's this, I'm curious to know what you think about the dimension of people. It's sort of like writing in a diary, right? Like maybe reduces some inhibition And I also wonder about the dimension of people feeling less judged also because of their identity, right? If I'm queer or I'm Black or I'm like, am I feeling like maybe this other person isn't judging me for all those things and it's really just my humanness and my story that's there. So I don't know if that's come up at all in what you've been looking at, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, actually, that is in my interviews, I always ask, why were you so open to telling Misty things? And they have said, it is because you're not judging me. She's just there to listen and she's there to agree, not necessarily agree, but she's there to hear my side of the story. And I think important too is sometimes we as people, they tell us a story and we want to relate, so we tell a story, right? We interject and we say, oh, the same thing happened to me. But not necessarily what you need at the moment. You need to tell your side and get it off your chest. And so Misty gives people an opportunity to do that. We are hoping to get into the dementia space in the spring. We haven't got there quite yet due to COVID and all the restrictions. Everything's kind of getting better, here in Tempe. So can't quite touch on that yet, but that's future work that I'm working on. But yeah, feeling less judged and, just reducing that has been really important. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jordan.
Over to you, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you for both presentations. I think are incredible. I very inspired for both, and I'm thinking a little about how much important is to mediate those interactions today, and because we are moving from this like critical time slowly, but moving forward from the COVID time when people was isolated and labor got highly restricted. And I will like to ask to both Jumana and Jordan about how do you think it's the timely of your projects in this moment, particularly Jumana having understand working for 5 years in this. And the case of Jordan is a more recent with the Mirabella community. I think have 1 year and a half since it has been installed. Do you think that this time has something relevant or important or different that makes that your projects are more urgent or relevant for the communities that you're serving?
I 100% think so. I think COVID is a perfect time and perfect example of why we need these kinds of technologies. So for instance, one of the women that participates in my study, her mother is in an assisted living facility in New Jersey. But this woman is also older herself, so she's afraid to fly. And her mother has been in and out of lockdown and has been isolated for the past 2 years and hasn't had human contact, hasn't had anybody, and is kind of slowly draining herself. She's slipped away, she's not in good health, and it all kind of started around COVID. And had she had a Misty or something to keep her company and augment human interaction when it wasn't available, she might not have slipped into the place she's at right now so quickly, at least.
If I may go, I absolutely agree as well. The technology was already starting to enable, the dialogue around it was, by the year so and so distribute the workforce going to be distributed. You can work with anyone from anywhere, and it's kind of been a slow moving process, but you could also already feel it if you were. From my own personal experience, when I started working freelance and not being in the office with people, it completely changed my relationship with them, with the work I was doing, with how they received the work I was doing. And so there were some of us that were experiencing this much more concretely earlier on, unintentionally being early adopters. And then what happened, honestly, is that COVID just sort of smash cut to a place where everyone is supposed to feel this, even if just for a little bit of time. And I think COVID was revelatory. It didn't do anything new, but I think it created two things. One, an understanding that is rare in history of a universal shared collective trauma. In that one sense, we are all sharing a context. It's united. It's uniting. It gives us a sense of each other. It's one thing we can all agree on. Whether or not we agree on how it's being dealt with, we can agree on that it's changing the world. And the second, it is that what COVID has done is remind us honestly of our vulnerability and our need for other people. Even those of us who are really strong and resilient and see themselves as individualists, it put us all to the test. And so all of a sudden we're like, oh, we are stopped being distracted by just keeping moving and doing the work and realizing I missed something. Something's missing here and I need to reprioritize and think about it. So it absolutely, like the world, I feel like was heading in this direction where we were slowly introducing technology into a world and not noticing just how much of our humanity it was robbing. And then all of a sudden, we have to look at it more closely and say, how are we building it and why are we building it and what are we getting from it? So.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Martin, for a great question. For Jordan, who has to leave in less than 2 minutes, we're going to go to Gershon from Ghana. Gershon, go ahead. Gershon, we can't hear you, my friend.
Mute. Hello. Hello. Hello, Prof. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the opportunity. And I would also like to appreciate Jordan and Jumana for such an incredible presentation. This presentation is timely in the sense that Jumana made mention of the fact that connectivity is not connection. And that these technologies, these inventions have been made so that people have that deeper conversation. We try to have conversation where there will be mutual trust and that they are not being judged. I want to know from both, don't they think that too much, depending on this kind of technologies for too much, will lead to situations where sometimes these technologies could advise people to engage in, let's say, negativities, because people would depend on these technologies to the extent that they become addicted or something like that. And that there will be instances that this technology could also advise people to engage in certain negativities, which human beings would not advise people to do. Don't you think there could be instances like this? Thank you.
Yeah, I will answer that first because my research study is coming up soon. But I do very much agree with you. I do think there is a fine line where we go from technology intending to help and technology being hurtful. For instance, in the dementia space, I can see a scenario where an older adult is living with dementia or Alzheimer's and their family member thinks, oh, okay, well, I never have to interact with them again. They can just interact with Misty all the time. And I don't know what it looks like to set up precautions and barriers, to prevent these kinds of things from happening. But I 100% agree that they should exist and they should, be in conversations now. We need to be having interdisciplinary conversations with, healthcare professionals, therapists, the caregivers themselves, the people themselves, to how do we prevent this? How do we prevent it from exploiting people long term? So I agree with you.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you. We'll let you go. That was a marvelous presentation. Have the best user study.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye
Jordan.
now.
I mean,
Go ahead. Yes, you have to answer this one.
I think it's an excellent question. I think it's one that the team and I discuss and think about and fret over all the time, because anytime you're introducing technology, one of the things we want to avoid is technology solutionism, is that everything can be fixed by technology, and that's a very dangerous, very slippery slope. And so our perspective is, how do you introduce technology in a way that is respectful of human dignity and integrity, and at the same time addresses a specific issue, and only that issue. So it's not designed to do multiple things. So I'll say a couple of things. One of the ways in which we kind of manage that with Zany is that it is meant to be a group activity. So it's meant to be on a small scale. It's not meant to be an individual thing where it's just you and a robot or you and a bot on a going basis. Your participation depends on the reaction of the actual individuals that you're with. the technology itself is meant to disappear. Ultimately, it's like, will Melissa respond to me? If she doesn't respond, the conversation ends, so it's not, we're not building in technology that it itself is addictive. Our engagement measures are not how often do you use Zany, it's how often does this group of people actually connect and communicate with each other. So that's one thing. The second thing is we don't have, which I think is a brilliant question around negativity or advice giving. And we don't at any point purport that this is an AI solution. And again, going back to anthropomorphization, I can't even say the word now, but Zany is not meant to be intelligent. She's not meant to give you opinions. She's not meant to give you ideas. She's supposed to be completely, her one job is to put out questions. And so sort of as a reminder every day, she isn't predicting anything based on your behavior. I'm calling her she because it's easy, but Zany doesn't predict anything based on your behavior. Zany doesn't come back with feedback to you about how you should or shouldn't be. All she does is you can imagine Zany as being a set of prompts, cards on a table, only we've moved them to the digital space and facilitated them in a way that feels inclusive of a group. So there's no AI, and engagement is defined as a group activity, not engagement with the tool itself.
Thank you.
It's a great question, Gershon. And Jumana, I'm just thinking of applications for this, particularly in the academic sector. Some of the feedback we've received in newly launched online courses, as people are in remote areas and all over the world, is how can we be more in sync? In fact, even those students taking online degrees actually want sync mode. They want to be talking to real human beings. And so we're introducing non-compulsory synchronous time together during consult time, which usually doesn't exist in an online course. It's all asynchronous, quite very much flexible. But now we're getting feedback from students saying, look, we love the flexibility of the online space, but I wish we could connect more in person. And there are people on the call today who know that I've done that, for example, based on feedback late last year, introducing that into the 2021 early on. So I think about group work remotely, groups of 4 to 7 students. And if you've got a class in computer science of 3,000 students, well, those groups allow for bonding. And in the course that I'm running at the moment, Jumana and the team, Adib, have been quite patient with me in the installation of this onto Slack, and then looking at how we might do this in the future, where we break our groups into, for example, by assessment task or by region or by any other cross-sectional way that you want. And so how do we get connectivity happening? Well, the LMS packages, the learning management system platforms, are really letting us down there. They do have group discussion, but that goes to an extent, to a point, and it's really about your work. What happens when you turn up and don't talk about work? And that's the interesting part of the Zany, I think, because what it will do is strengthen the group work. And so it's not about work, but then it is, because that's one of the pluses I find. And Jumana, you and I have worked for some of the world's biggest corporations and consulting companies. We've done that in virtual teams. I know in the 1990s, it became a big thing to work in virtual teams. And there was someone from Pakistan, there was someone from Wollongong, and there was someone from Singapore. Wham, you're responding to a pre-sales engineering bid, but you don't know each other. And you've got a very minute time when you're doing bid responses or tender documentation to get to know one another for the first time. But then the more often it happens and the more you get more, I guess, comfortable with virtual teams, the easier it becomes. But I think Zany could facilitate that process across geographies, across cultures, across different economic systems, just to even open the mindset up about what's possible in these places based on the responses of that group, that virtual team. Where have you seen it work the most, friends?
I just want to go back a little bit back in time, and the what technology has allowed in terms of education, in terms of academic settings, and this ability to work remotely is wonderful. It's given access to a lot of people. At the same time, there was something that happens when two students are walking out of a class together and talking about what just happened in a way that continues the dialogue past the moment that it, supposedly ends. At the end of this call, everyone sort of like clicks off and goes away. You're not shuffling in your bag and picking up and say, where are you going? Let me do. So all of these opportunities for little connections, little moments of interaction disappear because we haven't built them into the technology. We haven't figured out yet how to do that because we haven't thought about it much, really. So one of the important things I think in an academic setting is to remember that a lot of learning happens when students engage with each other in informal ways, when they're able to learn of a different perspective because somebody has a different lived experience, a different history, comes from a different place, speaks a different language, brings a different context, all of those things that we haven't been designing into how we deliver academia and education today. We're talking about, like it's a, from the oracle and the professors, from people sharing, and a dialogue within the class as it's happening. But the informal network, the tree root structure underneath that helps people come back and remain strong and thrive, we haven't cracked that. And I think that that's a really important thing to think about, is when you're wanting people to learn, you want them to learn from multiple perspectives at the same time and multiple people at the same time. And part of that process of learning comes from your peers. It comes from them because you can compare how you are relative to where they are. It can open your eyes to a different way of seeing things. One of the ways Zany operates in this case, I know you mentioned the importance of synchronous connection, but given that not everyone can be up at the same time, and some people are sacrificing, I know, it's very early or very late for people to be on calls all the time, and it takes a different kind of energy and mental space. Zany believes that actually leveraging asynchronicity is great, because it gives you an opportunity to have a voice, to share a perspective when you're ready for it, when you're up and showered and ready, not when somebody says you're supposed to be up to come to the meeting. Leveraging some parts of, bringing some parts of technology to say, like, how can we create an environment? How can we replicate it? We're not going to replicate in the real world. It might be, we all have to be there all at the same time. But the benefit of this virtual world is that we're not. So how do we take advantage of that? How do we take advantage of this idea that we can all be together, even at different times? It's the feeling that you get. So I just wanted to make sure that I covered that. Where it works and you mentioned this, it isn't something that you say you introduce at scale. It works on project teams where you have to trust each other, where you have built in a reliance on each other. So, if it's a factory line, then it doesn't matter. You're just moving one thing over to another, and the responsibility just shifts. But when you're expected to have, when there are dependencies, when perspectives are important, when points of view are important, when you value innovation, when creativity is important. I mean, one of the worst things for creativity is this loneliness, this isolation that we're feeling. And so in environments that demand innovation, ideation, creativity, collaboration, it's imperative to have a facilitation of informal conversation.
That's so beautifully said. The human-to-human contact to me is mysterious. It's spontaneous. And Lisa and I covered that in our podcast over a year ago now. It was a beautiful conversation. The mystery of the Zany team is so special. And I know when a product is built by special people, it's not about selling. It's about giving and sharing and receiving. And one thing that has motivated me over the last year and a half, while I have been up at 2 o'clock in the morning, is that possibility that Germano Bugazella might call me at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. to check up on me. And I might get to communicate via email with the great Lisa Mandel, and then get some tech support from Adib Abugazela, who's not related to Jumana, by the way, to actually get Slack and Zany going on Slack. ASU loves a lot of the collaborative tools. In fact, they throw everything at us and we throw everything at our students. But we've really started to fixate on Slack in this course on Smart City Infrastructure. But I love my class. I'm about to go to it in 2 minutes. And while we've sort of introduced Zany, the concept, we've realized that being authentic is what Zany is all about, but also how we've run our class. And it's all about co-design, of course, and delivery of this focus area of dementia. In fact, we're studying dementia this whole session within a smart cities context. But I just want to reiterate why human-to-human contact is important. It's that feeling when you wake up in the morning and you want to jump out of bed because you know that what awaits you is not so much your work. That's really important, but the people who are at your workplace. And there's no greater feeling than that. And Jumana, you have been that person for me. Lisa, you've been that person for me. And Adib, I've gotten to know you more recently. But I can't wait to see this be deployed in some of the world's largest organizations, where I think this has not been more important. And you built it before COVID, right? You conceived this before it became sort of a bigger thing, a bigger deal. I can't wait for it to see it be deployed and for more humans to be in connection with each other, socializing, and seeing productivity skyrocket and positivity. I go to you, Gershon. I think you're right about the bot interaction. It can almost go in circles and reiterate negativity, but humans, when they get together, there's a spark, and that spark happened today. So I thank everyone for their patience. I thank Jumana, Lisa, Adib, Sam, and one other person. Tarek, yes, thank you. And to everyone who's come, Martin, Gershon, Toby, and of course the host of other people, Jordan, who just went off. What a session.
Thank you.
What a colloquium. Have a great day, everyone, and a great week. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, friends.